please. What I would propose we do, I know we ended the last meeting with Mr. Leipert's amendment still on the table. I'd propose we take 50 minutes with the first group. If the second group's here, we'll take another 50. That'll leave us 20 minutes for business at the end, if that's agreeable. Go ahead, Mr. Caron.
From what I understand, I think we could get this resolved fairly quickly. We left it in suspense at the last meeting, but I think that if we follow standard practice of the committee in the past, when there was a motion that hadn't been resolved, we tend to start the meeting with the motion, but I really don't think it will take much time. There's an amendment that hasn't been discussed, and so I would like to start with the motion.
That's the procedure. I was just suggesting something a little different and go to the last 20 minutes of the meeting, but if that's your preference, then we'll do that. Mr. Leipert's amendment was on the floor, and who was on the speaking list?
Mr. Leipert didn't have a chance to...
Okay. Mr. Leipert, your amendment. And
I'm
if you
good.
want it,
I'm good.
Your amendment was, just so we're all clear.
I don't have it in front of me because...
The clerk has.
Good.
Shortly.
As a matter of
Sorry,
inserting...
gentlemen, we'll get to you in a moment.
As a matter of inserting from the previous motion the 4 or 5 words around having the minister appear as part of this motion.
Okay, is there any further discussion? Mr. Caron.
Très rapidement, j'espère.
Very briefly, I hope that this motion will be supported in the government side. I tried to introduce a motion to have the minister appear before us along with some officials. This was rejected by the majority of representatives on the Liberal side. I sincerely hope that sooner rather than later we will have the opportunity to hear the minister speak in this question. I heard the minister acknowledge the possibility of appearing before the committee in the House yesterday. I think it would be a good idea to get a date chosen. I would suggest then an amendment to the motion, which suggesting this coming Thursday, the 21st of April, for the minister to appear. Obviously, we want to have her appear sooner rather than later to talk about this question. So I will listen to Mr. Leipert first, and then I will propose my amendment following that.
So, yes, I do, Chair. Thank you. I'd like to take a vote on Mr. Leipert's motion, or sorry, his amendment. Excuse me. I would like to, after that vote, like to resume discussion on my motion and propose an amendment of my own, please.
Okay. The question's been called then on Mr. Leipert's amendment. Do you want to read it, clerk? Could you please, and we'll go from there.
No, sure.
The amendment reads, Mr. Leipert moved that the motion be amended by adding after the words Canada Revenue Agency, CRA, and before the words including Ms. Stephanie Henderson, the following words, and the Honourable Diane Leboutillier, Minister of National Revenue.
Are we clear? Everyone clear? All those in favour? Opposed? Amendment is lost. Mr. Sabera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everyone. After we adjourned on Tuesday's meeting, and before we could get a complete thorough discussion of my original motion, I had further conversations and insight into the motion. So I'd like to propose an amendment of my own to the original motion. I had the opportunity to talk to many colleagues and reflect on the points raised by the opposition. So in a spirit of cooperation, openness, and transparency, I would like to amend my original motion by deleting the words after that the committee called for, and inserting the following: the Honourable Diane Leboutillier, excuse me my pronunciation, the Honourable Diane Leboutillier, Minister of National Revenue, officials from the Canada Revenue Agency, including Ms. Stephanie Henderson, Manager of Offshore Compliance, and officials from the Department of Justice, to appear before the committee to provide the steps taken by the agency to combat tax evasion, and tax avoidance, and provide an explanation as to the current status of the KPMG Isle of Man file. That the committee also call for officials of KPMG to appear before the committee to explain their role in this file. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
That motion that can be passed out, Mr. Caron.
Do we have the motion? Yes, we do.
Can you,
Do you have copies? Well, that's not enough for everybody, though.
Yeah, for the.
yep.
Question to the chair. That's a substantive change to the motion, and I'm wondering if through you, the member would consider withdrawing his first motion and putting this on the floor as his motion, replacing it instead of an amendment. It's highly unusual for an amendment for someone doing this.
It's I don't see it as changing the intent of the motion, Phil, but if I don't imagine you a problem withdrawing the original motion and putting that forward as a new motion, do you?
It would be simpler.
It'd be simpler.
Okay, I'll agree with the chair on this, and we'll put it down as a new motion.
So you're withdrawing the original motion and moving this one as proposed, as you stated.
Sorry, pardon me?
You're withdrawing the original motion and what's been passed around, proposed amendment, would be the new motion. Is that correct?
Chair, I will only do that in that manner if they consent to bringing the motion bring the motion to the floor immediately to be voted on.
Do we have agreement to that effect?
Well,
Okay.
that removes
All
our
right,
right to
so it
debate.
will be.
Want to remove our right to debate?
So we continue on the amendment.
No, I
Chair.
think I think there may be some misunderstanding here. Is I believe what Mr. Sabero is asking is he is willing to withdraw the original motion that this amendment proposed to amend. And bring in this amendment as a new motion if it can be dealt with now.
Just a point of order on,
Okay.
on that. That, if I'm interpreting that right, that removes our ability to debate his
No,
new motion.
no.
So it
No,
can
no.
go on the floor and we can
It
debate
can
it.
go on the floor and be debated.
Oh, then I'm fine.
Are you all right, Mr. Caron? Okay. So you are withdrawing your motion withdrawn. You have proposed, do you want to read your new motion again and we'll debate it?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That the Standing Committee on Finance call for the Honourable Diane Leboutillier, Minister of National Revenue, officials from the Canada Revenue Agency, including Ms. Stephanie Henderson, Manager of Offshore Compliance, and officials from the Department of Justice to appear before the committee to provide the steps being taken by the agency to combat tax evasion and tax avoidance and provide an explanation as to the current status of the KPMG/Isle of Man file. That this committee also call for officials of KPMG to appear before the committee to explain their role in this file.
Lisa, Ms. Wright, rather.
I'd like to know from the mover in the amendment why he's removing the call for documentation. There's reference in the original motion to a call for production of a document. I'm wondering why, and which to me, your chairness would mean that this is a substantial change in terms of an amendment to a motion, and I'd like to understand why it was removed.
Mr. Caron first and then Mr. Grable.
Je suis
Do
d'accord avec...
you want to answer that, Mr. Sabera, first?
Briefly, Mr. Chair. This is a new motion.
Okay.
I'm sorry, it wasn't.
He said this is a new motion.
Briefly, this is
Now
a
it's
new
a new
motion.
motion. Okay, I get
Mr.
it.
Caron.
Madame Reid, qu'il s'agit d'un élément substantiel.
I agree with Ms. Wright's point that there is certainly some of it that hasn't been reproduced in the new motion. I also think that we need to have a date in this current motion. It's great to know that the Minister and Ms Henderson are prepared to come, but when? The original Liberal motion and my motion spoke about a date, and I think it would be a good idea to have a more specific date included in the motion. The Liberals originally mentioned the 12th of April. That's been and gone. Next week we're sitting, and the following week after is a riding week, and I would like to have the Minister and Ms Henderson and other officials from the CRA appear before us, ideally on Thursday the 21st, given that we already have witnesses for the 2nd, for Tuesday rather. We also need to have a meeting to discuss on what we hear. At the moment, in this motion that's been presented, we're talking about one meeting with the Minister and the officials and Ms Henderson, but then we haven't scheduled any follow-up, any time for discussion. And I would like to know why, and if I don't get a suitable and satisfactory answer, then I'll be moving some amendments myself.
Mr. Caron, we're very confident that the Minister will make an appearance before this committee, and we put forward a motion for her to do so. If that changes at any point, we can insert a date. But for now, we are confident that the Honourable Minister will be appearing before our committee.
Could I ask, would that be before the end of April? Can anybody answer that?
Yeah.
We have meetings on the 19th already booked. So it had to be the 21st. Mr. Champagne.
Non, Monsieur le Président, je voudrais d'abord juste pour clarifier.
A point of clarification. The government is making a historic investment of $444 million to work on tax evasion, to make sure that we have the tools that we need to look into this, to inquire in this. I'm getting to my point. I am getting to my point.
Je comprends. Je suis en train de vérifier avec la ministre pour vous donner la
I'm just checking with the Minister so we can get a confirmation. If my colleagues can wait a few minutes, I can wait a little bit, then we will be able to find out if she can appear. But as we're talking at the moment, I'm trying to check this out. I'm trying to get a date. The Minister wants to come, and I'm in communication with her, trying to see if she is available on Thursday. So perhaps we could continue with our deliberations, and then I hope very quickly I'll be able to give you an answer, because we're in communication at the moment with her.
C'est une réponse à laquelle j'aimerais revenir, mais j'ai pas eu de réponse.
I haven't had an answer to my second question. What about having a second meeting to have a report based on what we hear? Yes, we want to have the Minister appear, but we have to afterwards look together in committee at what's been said during this meeting. We can't have one without the other. It's a question that needs a lot more discussion. It would be a problem for me if we didn't have this, and that's why in the original motion we talked about having a meeting. I said so the committee can have a meeting so we can study what's been said for the report. So there are two different points. There's one, having the Minister come along, and two, having time to do the report.
Greywall, and I want to make a point myself after that. Mr. McCollum.
My comments are in light of the fact that the Parliamentary Secretary just offered to communicate at this moment with the Minister. If Mr. Caron agrees to that, allowing that to happen, I would like to put forward another motion, which I will do right now, just so the committee is aware of what I would like to put on the table. And it relates to the Minister directly, so I'm thinking if it could be coordinated, you might have the Minister here for both issues. And my motion is that the committee invite the Honourable Diane Louboutière, the Minister of National Revenue, and officials from Canada Revenue Agency to testify about the main estimates 2016-2017 on or before May 20th, 2016. Thinking about the value of the Minister's time, if she's coming to committee, perhaps she could speak to the main estimates at that time as well, which is traditionally what we invite the Minister to do. So I'm looking for Mr. Caron's acceptance of that if the Parliamentary Secretary is serious about contacting the Minister to get a date while we have a little bit of time.
Mr. Graywall, you wanted to make a point.
Yeah, I think that the heart of this issue that we're trying to get to on Mr. Cervera's memo, motion, a lot of the information and the facts are going to come from the CRA officials, including Ms. Stephanie Henderson. And I think that will give us a good baseline. And then, and my understanding is that the minister and the CRA aren't going to come at the same time, right? There'll be two separate meetings. Is that correct, Mr. Chair?
I would, to be honest, don't know. It depends what the committee wants to do. If it's your preference to have the minister, then it'll 1 hour with the minister and then another hour with the CRA officials. I have no problem with that. I do agree with Mr. Caron's point that the committee, and I think we can probably do that as a steering committee. We do, if we're going to hold a hearing, there may be an additional witness or two that we might want to look at. And we also need time to draft some kind of a report.
Mr. Chair, we're very confident that the minister will be available before the end of April. I would like to call a vote on this motion and related amendments.
I'm going to, Mr. Caron. Unless I see.
J'ai aucun doute que la ministre va.
I don't doubt that the minister wants to come along. She said this yesterday, but she said at some point, eventually. When? When does that mean? Does it mean by the end of April, by the end of May, by the end of June? When are we talking about? In the fall? We don't know. Eventually means all sorts of things. It can mean all sorts of things. I understand what Mr. Champagne was saying. I understand that he's checking the minister's availability. I raised this question on Tuesday. I said, we've known about this since Tuesday. We also have our schedule. It's public. Everybody knows what it is. We know that there's one slot before the end of April, and that is the 21st of April, the next Thursday. So if we're saying that the minister is going to come before us before the end of April, then it's only the 21st that's available. So surely in the past 48 hours, she could have been contacted earlier.
And I'm not sure the procedure, clerk, you may have to tell me. Could we either table this discussion where it's at or set it aside or whatever, hear the witnesses till 5 after 12 or so? By that time, maybe we'll have some information from Mr. Champagne. Are we agreeable to do do we need a motion? Okay.
Put a motion on the floor to do exact that.
Okay. The motion would read to postpone the question till 5 after 12, or the discussion, not the question. Okay. We agreed to that. Mr. Caron.
Clear. How much time will we have at the end to discuss this?
Well, no, we're going to, before we start the next witnesses, so if we need, we're not going to run into the problem of running out of time. We'll hear from Mr. McDonald and the first two witnesses on our hearing, the first four, I guess. We'll go till 10 after 12, and then we'll come back to this question. Is that agreeable?
Yeah.
Okay. Then thank you, witnesses, for being patient, and we will tighten up the time a little bit. We will have 50 minutes for discussion. We have with us from the C.D. Howe Institute, Mr. Alexander. From the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, Mr. McDonald. By video conference from Toronto, Ms. Morris with the Canadian Association of Retired Persons, and also by video conference from Toronto with the Chartered Professional Accountants of Canada, Mr. Ball. So thank you for appearing, and we are now discussing related to the order of reference of Bill C-2, an act to amend the Income Tax Act. We will start with you, Mr. Alexander, and my apologies for the delay.
No apology required. The business of government precedes the business of witnesses. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today about the proposed amendments to the Income Tax Act. I can look at each of the measures in terms of the pros and cons, but I also would like to provide a couple of comments about the efficiency of the items in terms of fostering inclusive economic growth in the years ahead. So I'm really going to focus on three items. The first one is the cut to the middle income tax bracket. The second one is the introduction of the high income tax bracket, and the third is the reduction in the ceiling or contribution limits to TFSAs. In terms of the middle income tax bracket cut, the revenue, the estimated revenue impact to the federal government is $3.5 billion. That's tax savings that will go into the hands of households. As an economist and a former forecaster, I have little doubt that the bulk of that tax saving will in fact go into expenditure and will be stimulative to economic growth. To the extent that some of the money is saved, this is a, I would view that, although it won't add to economic growth or real GDP growth, it will come at a time when Canadians are carrying an awful lot of debt. And so I think that there is a strong economic rationale for providing tax relief to middle income households. In terms of the introduction of the new income tax bracket, there's really two different dimensions that I think have been discussed or focused on. The first is the revenue capacity of the tax revenues that will be generated by the high income tax bracket. There was a suggestion that the middle tax bracket cut could be paid for largely by the implementation of a high tax bracket. The Department of Finance estimate on the cost of, or the revenue generation from the high tax bracket is roughly about $2 billion. So there is a revenue shortfall. However, analysis by the C.D. Howe Institute suggests that there is a downside risk to the amount of revenues that will be generated by the high income tax bracket. This fundamentally has to do with how, what you estimate will be the behavioral response of high income earners that are facing the higher tax rate. And there's, sort of economic jargon expression, the elasticity of taxable income, and you fundamentally have to make an assumption as to what the reaction function is going to look like. Alexander Loren of our institute did work on this, and he looked at 11 different studies, some from Canada, some from international. And what he found was that the response of high-income earners could be more pronounced than the Department of Finance is currently anticipating. And as a consequence, his estimate is that the high-income tax bracket could generate perhaps only $1 billion in new revenues. This is not to suggest that the Department of Finance is wrong. It is really about what assumption you make with respect to the behavioral response. And as a consequence, really what I want to flag to the committee is a downside risk to the revenues that might be generated. However, you might argue that the introduction of the high income tax rate is not just about generating fiscal revenues. You could argue that this is about increasing the progressivity of the tax system. We really should ask questions about whether this will create more inclusive growth and whether it will actually reduce income inequality. So if we think about it from this point of view, I think that one of the big risks related to the behavioral response is the level that the tax rate is going to get to in terms of a combined federal provincial tax rate in different provinces, and it will be above 50% of income in a number of jurisdictions. This can lead to distortions, and in fact, it could lead some provinces to cut their high income tax rates. And as a consequence, what you have to wonder about is whether this creates an environment where we end up with a transfer of tax points from the provinces to the federal government, when in actual fact, I'd argue that given the fiscal pressures on provinces to deal with education and healthcare priorities, if anything, we should be seeing a transfer of tax points going in the opposite direction. Nevertheless, there is no question that when you look at the empirical data, that the high end of the income spectrum has seen more income growth in recent, over the last decade or more. This is a reflection of a global trend. It represents a global competition for talent. And as a consequence, labor is now being marketed in the global arena, and this is putting pressure on high income earnings. So from a financial capacity point of view, one can argue that the high income tax bracket is reflecting the fact that high income earners have more capacity to contribute to tax revenues. But there are a few potential unintended consequences I would like just to flag to the committee. The first one is that Canada is in a war for global talent. We're competing to attract and retain talent, and the high income tax bracket may deter that. We are looking
up pretty quickly, Mr. Alexander.
I will be very brief. Second, the earnings also reflect risk-taking, and as a consequence, while the government wants to promote increased productivity and innovation, we need to be sensitive to the fact that higher taxes on high-income earners is basically a tax on success, and it also is a deterrent to taking additional risk. In point of fact, I think the government is absolutely right to be focusing on trying to create more inclusive growth, but I would argue the tax system is not the most effective way of achieving this. I think removing barriers to opportunity for low-income Canadians, from Aboriginals, for youth, for immigrants, and others, would be a more effective way of having an impact on income inequality. Lastly, on the TFSA limit reduction, the 2 points I would make is that the TFSAs are actually used across the entire income spectrum. They aren't just used by high-income individuals. Many lower income households are actually pushing up against the contribution limits, and I'd be happy to discuss further in the Q&A. And lastly, the complaint that the government will face large lost potential tax revenues from the TFSA, I would flag that this is a bit of a perverse position to take on the TFSA, because basically you're saying that if it's successful in encouraging Canadians to save, we should effectively take measures to ensure that they don't do that. And I think that the revenue, the opportunity cost revenues that are being estimated to the government from the TFSA are probably overstated, because if the incentive isn't there, Canadians won't save as much.
Mr. Alexander. Mr. McDonald, try and keep it to pretty well 5 minutes if you can.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I timed it to 5 minutes. Hopefully I can keep to that this time around. I'd like to thank the committee today for their invitation to speak. There's certainly a great many interesting topics that emerge from this year's budget. The focus on on-reserve infrastructure, particularly schools, clean water, and housing, is very positive and long overdue. The improved child and senior benefits will both reduce poverty rates among those groups by several points. This fact I was surprised to see not better highlighted in the budget, actually. However, today I'd like to focus on the tax bracket trade, specifically the creation of a new top income tax brackets whose proceeds are used to pay for a cut in the second bracket. Now, to be clear, we've advocated for a new top bracket for some time, particularly given the large income gains enjoyed by the wealthiest over the past 2 decades. Although to maximize revenue from this new bracket, 2 additional measures are necessary. 1 is the prosecution of illegal tax evasion, and 2 is the closing of tax loopholes. Successful prosecution will be substantially aided by new auditors budgeted for in this budget. And hopefully this committee will also examine and close tax expenditures or tax loopholes that allow the richest to avoid paying the statutory rate, a rate which most Canadians pay. While I am in favor of a new top bracket, using its proceeds to reduce the rate in the second bracket is in effect an upper-class tax cut, as I show in more detail in my paper, Real Change for the Middle Class, which I believe you have a copy of. I should point out that there's no official definition of the middle class, but undoubtedly it is going to have some relationship to the middle of the income spectrum, or median income, which is just over $60,000 for families or just over $30,000 for individuals. Now, the second bracket doesn't even start until one makes at least $45,000, or 50% more than the Canadian median individual income. Without being in the second bracket, there can be no benefit from the rate cut proposed here. However, the full benefit of that rate cut isn't available until one makes $90,000 individually, or 3 times the median. And that full benefit is available to those making up to $200,000 when the new bracket kicks in. I'd like to call your attention to Figure 2 on page 3 in my report, which shows quite clearly that the largest benefits go to the top 10% of families making over $170,000, excluding, of course, the top 2% of families making over $300,000 who pay substantially more due to the new top bracket. The upper class 10%, excluding the very top, will see on average almost $800 more per family after the bracket trade. Families making between $170,000 and $300,000, I hope, is no one's definition of the middle class, but they are by far the largest beneficiaries of this bracket trade. However, the middle deciles that you can see better in Figure 2 on page 5, see surprisingly little of the benefit of the bracket trade. For instance, the lower middle class, the 4th and 5th deciles, see an average benefit of only $30, to the richest's almost $800. The upper middle class of deciles 6 and 7 do better, making about $175 a year, but again, this is only a quarter of what the wealthiest make at $800 a year. The paper examines 4 other possibilities using pre-existing tax transfer mechanisms to spend roughly the same amount, or roughly $3 billion, while attempting to better target the middle class. The options examined are dropping the rate in the lowest bracket, increasing the basic personal exemption, increasing the GST credit, and increasing the working income tax benefit, or WITB. Any of these measures provides more benefit to middle-class families. For instance, the WITB option would provide $350 on average to lower middle-class families, or 10 times more than the $30 they would make with the cut in the second bracket. I'd encourage committee members to examine these alternative possibilities as more effective options than a rate cut in the second bracket as described in the budget. It is worth pointing out that roughly $3 billion raised by the new top bracket is a fair amount of money. I'm not sure that measure needs to be spent on a tax measure. That money should be spent on a tax measure. $3 billion annually, for instance, would be sufficient to eliminate undergraduate tuition, for instance. It would also be sufficient to halve the fees for long-term care for the elderly, or dramatically increase home care and caregiver respite supports, measures that will likely have more visibility than changing how much is deducted at source for most Canadians. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. You had it timed wrong. You're 30 seconds under. Thank you very much, Mr. McDonald, and thank you for the paper as well. From Toronto, then, Ms. Morris, 5 minutes if you could.
Great, thanks very much. With respect to the provisions in the change, our members are very pleased with the concept of tax relief. We polled them about the different priorities in the government's election, and a quarter of them said tax relief for the middle class was their highest priority. That was the second number, only short of increasing funds to home care. In terms of the logistics of how effective the budget has been in achieving that goal, we didn't poll on those specifics. Where we have some concerns about the proposed changes is with respect to the reduction in the TFSA limits. Before the limits were increased, we polled our members to see if they were supportive of the increase, and fully 2/3 of them were. With the announcement of a potential reduction, we polled again, and about 54% were opposed. So possibly the gap there is people who anticipated using the higher limit that weren't able to. Approximately 81% of our members actually have TFSAs, so this is a number that is, this is a proposal that is near and dear to their hearts. I would say that our concern is primarily about an ad hoc approach to changing the retirement framework for Canadians. What we know right now is that there is much poverty among Canadians, particularly seniors, particularly single seniors, particularly female single seniors. And what we would prefer to see the government do is to take an overall strategic approach, and rather than tinkering with one particular element and particularly reducing the relief available, to look at tax retirement savings as a whole. CARP is a strong advocate for an enhanced Canada pension plan. We see movement happening in Ontario for a Made in Ontario solution, strong preference for a Canada-wide solution that covers all Canadians. We're also deeply concerned about the way that RIFs are currently structured, that even with the changes that have been made in the past years, lowering the mandatory rates, they are not low enough. Seniors are very vulnerable to changes in the market under the current structure, and the assumption that the current rates seem to be set on of a 5% real return, I would say does not reflect the reality of a low-risk portfolio that seniors would want to and be wise to adopt. So for us to support a reduction in TFSAs as a standalone measure, we cannot do that. We are aware that there's over 250,000 Canadians right now who are aged 90 and over. That number is projected to increase, particularly among women. Again, a group that's very vulnerable for living in poverty as they age, and we think that the risks are falling far short of meeting their needs. So reducing, an alternative vehicle that might offer some relief doesn't have the support of CARP. And I'll stop there.
Well, thank you very much. We're making a great time. Mr. Ball, floor is yours. 5 minutes if you could.
Yeah. Okay. All right, thank you. On behalf of the Chartered Professional Accountants of Canada, I wanted to thank you for the opportunity. Just as a bit of background, I'm a member of CPA Canada's Tax Policy Committee. I'm National Tax Partner of BDO Canada. I'm also a Chartered Professional Accountant. I did want to point out that the CPA designation is now, with the amalgamation, is the single accounting and business designation in Canada. It was accomplished by the merger of the three legacy designations, CAs, CMAs, and CGAs. So we have over 200,000 members now. So one thing I wanted to make clear, I guess, is that we do recognize that the government was, elected in terms of a fairly specific platform, and the main tax changes I'm going to focus on were part of that. So we do respect that, and we do recognize that they received a majority. C2 has three main important tax changes in it: a reduction of the middle class tax bracket that's been discussed, the new top bracket, and decreasing the TFSA contribution room. But I think from a more general point of view, what we really wanted to point out and talk about was the fact that when you do change the tax system, it can have various effects, positive, negative, and maybe some unintended changes as well. So we wanted to sort of talk at a more general level, I think, and just reinforce that the tax system is a key lever in terms of ensuring that we have a business environment that remains competitive, that we attract and retain the best and brightest minds, and we also achieve economic growth and prosperity. So our main message today is that it is difficult to talk about three pretty specific tax changes, I guess, in isolation without considering the tax system as a whole. So going forward, our key message today really is that what we'd like to see before any other tax measures are introduced or changed, that there is a review from top to bottom of the tax system. And the review should focus on a number of important factors, being reducing complexity, improving efficiency, effectiveness, and competitiveness as some of the key things. And we think that such a review would actually benefit taxpayers, businesses, and the government as well. So the goal being to make Canada the most attractive place possible in terms of a place to live and invest and do business. So we think that this is squarely in line with the government's agenda for growth. We also think there's no better time than now to do it for a few reasons. The main one being, I guess, there hasn't been a real review of the entire system for over 50 years. The last one was the Royal Commission on Taxation in 1966. So, clearly things have changed a lot since then. The other thing, and I think this has been recognized, is the tax system now is actually very complicated. It's complex. It's difficult to understand. It's very labor intensive to deal with, and there are inefficiencies and costs associated with that. In our summary, we point out that the compliance cost is probably somewhere, according to the Fraser Institute, somewhere around $25 billion for taxpayers and businesses, and perhaps almost $7 billion for the government. The The third reason really is we think there's a lot of support right now for a significant review of the tax system as well. We note in particular for 4 years now, this committee has called upon the government to explore ways to simplify the Income Tax Act and the tax system. So, and just this past February, it was recommended that the government initiate a comprehensive review of Canada's tax laws with the objective of making the country's taxation system simpler, fairer, and more efficient. So, we just can't support that enough. So we were also encouraged that there was reference in the 2016 budget to the government's intention to review a review of the tax system, and we also wanted to recognize the chair's recent comments as well that there's a need to look at taxation as a whole, including everything from consumption taxes to income taxes to corporate tax to boutique tax credits, or tax breaks. So again, that's exactly where we sit, and I think a lot of other experts do as well. So just getting into maybe how such a review would work, we believe that there should be a panel, and it should be guided by the following principles. To keep tax rates as low as possible, the tax basis as broad as possible, and eliminate inefficiency or ineffective tax preferences. We'd also echo the comment made earlier that the rate is exceeding 50% in a lot of jurisdictions, and that is getting fairly high to levels that haven't been seen for some time. Next key thing when reviewing the tax system, to take a look at the tax mix, and especially between income taxes and consumption taxes. We believe that Canada is out of step with the other OECD countries in terms of that. We don't have specific comments, I guess, on the TFSA, but we do have the comment that the tax system should not tax personal savings, and there should be some sort of enhanced incentives to make sure that Canadians are saving properly for their retirement. Another key objective, we believe, is to try and keep corporate rates as low as possible to maintain Canada's competitive edge, attract new investment, and create jobs. We also believe that a review should focus on a pro-growth approach that encourages innovation, productivity, and prosperity. And finally, working with the provinces and territories, and a lot's been done in that regard, but we still think more could be done in terms of a more coordinated approach that will benefit everyone. So I guess just to sum up, Canada needs a tax system that is built for the 21st century, not the what we think is sort of a patchwork of original rules amendments and fixes that have sort of accumulated over time and can cause uncertainty and unintended results. So with a 4-year mandate, we believe that now is the best time to deal with this, to work on a tax review and possibly tax reform, and we would call on the government to have the vision, commitment, and focus to move forward to it. So I'd be happy to address any questions as well on, of course, these issues.
Thank you all. Turning to our first round of questions, Mr. McKinnon, floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, et merci.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of our witnesses for coming along. It was very interesting, even if at times some of you were contradicting each other. Mr. Ball, I was a student in commerce a long, long time ago, too long ago, and one of your predecessors, that's to say, one of the leaders of the former accountants association, I knew him, and at the time he was called Lyman McGuinness, and he talked about the need to simplify the tax system. So at least you're certainly being consistent over the years, you and your predecessor. You made a comment, and I would like you to expand on it a little bit. You said
OECD countries. Donc, j'aimerais que vous...
I would like you to talk about those OECD countries which you do think are a model to follow in terms of simplifying the tax system and making it efficient and effective. What are some of the examples of that you feel would be a model to follow? And maybe you could just expand on some of the general principles around that.
The approach I'd use more actually would be to take a look at all the OECD countries and, for us to determine which aspects of which country we like. I don't think personally it would be so much an issue of picking one country and deciding if that's the one to follow. So maybe I'm not really quite answering the question because I probably use a bit different approach, I guess. I think that would be sort of one of the key things, though, for a tax review panel, though, would be to look through how all the other countries work and take the best from the best, and come up with a system that makes sense that way. In terms of the tax mix part, though, we do believe generally that most of the OECD countries, and especially over in Europe, would have a lot more emphasis on commodity tax and personal income tax, and that is something we support.
Say if anybody else has a point they want to add, just raise your hand on the question and I will let you in. Mr. McKinnon.
Well, just building on that, Mr. Chair, perhaps I'd ask the other witnesses if there are international models of taxation that they believe sort of stand out as clearly superior to Canada's.
So there's a large body of academic research that's been done on tax efficiency internationally, and many of it, an awful lot of it is looking at OECD countries and comparing the various tax systems and the effects. And one of the lessons from that literature review is that consumption taxes are the least economically distortionary taxes to the economies. You see that across countries. The United States is unique in not having a consumption tax, and as a rule, economists prefer consumption taxes over personal income taxes and over business taxes. I think you would find that after consumption taxes, although you have to address the regressiveness of the impact of consumption taxes in terms of the income distribution. So you need to be sensitive to those issues. But beyond that, the literature basically argues that that the next least distortionary economic taxes are personal income taxes, and then the most distortionary are business taxes. And so beyond that, it's a matter of figuring out not just what's the tax mix going to be, but just also the simplicity of the system, because there's costs, there's a lot of economic costs for abiding by a very complex tax system. And this is where you get into questions about whether, I was encouraged that the budget eliminated some of the boutique tax credits simply on the basis of simplifying the overall tax system. But I think that's where you end up over time. I think the tax system incrementally tends to want to become more complex. So I would echo the comment that a review of the tax system and looking for ways to create more efficiencies, fix or improve the tax mix, and make it more efficient would be a very desirable thing.
In a minute.
Only have another minute?
Mr. McDonald, yeah. I'm trying to limit people to 6 minutes in order to meet our 12:10 deadline.
All right,
Mr. McDonald.
Thanks for the question. Certainly progressivity is an important feature of any income tax system, and the more you switch away from income taxes towards other types of taxes like consumption, you end up with less progressivity in the system as opposed to more, which is something that we've pushed for, is more progressivity in a tax system. That being said, you can address progressivity by switching more to income taxes, but you can also address it often by closing tax loopholes, of which there are plenty. Unfortunately, this budget introduces another one, which is for teachers, which I'm in some degree in favor of because my wife is a teacher. That being said, we've traded closing some tax loopholes for opening other tax loopholes. I think, broadly speaking, a much cleaner, progressive income tax system is going to be much easier to meet in terms of a lower bill. I mean, the other thing that I would point out is that what are we doing with the taxes? What are we spending that money on? Are we spending that money on something that we benefit from? And in such a case, I think it's well worth increasing taxes to pay for programs that we can all benefit from, or that certain portions of the population can benefit disproportionately from. And so it's very dangerous to disconnect taxation from what the money is being spent on. Thank you.
Ms. Wright, 6 minutes.
Thank you very much. I guess for Mr. Alexander, if I could. Mr. Alexander, in talking about taxes, one of the charts that the Parliamentary Budget Officer provided last Friday is some updates on how much tax income that the government plans on collecting in the next 5 years until the end of the 2021. And it says it's about $5.7 billion in extra taxes, and it all seems to be backloaded in the final 3 years. And the question I have is, and maybe CPA can help me as well, Mr. Ball, if we're talking about a review of our tax system, realistically, from beginning to end, having just commissioned a Canadian Transportation Act review that took 18 months and is still in study, how long before the call for a process to study the system to an end result where you see increases in taxation coming in because of efficiency, how long does that take? Isn't that a generational thing?
I'm afraid I don't think I have an expert opinion on how long it takes for the process to occur. I haven't done any studies of past tax reforms to see how long from start a review to end a review. But having said that, I think that there still is merit to constantly looking at the tax system and trying to evaluate efficiency, simplicity, and economic impact, and whether it's achieving the goals that the government has. But I'm sorry that I don't have a specific answer to your question.
And perhaps, Mr. Ball, I should have put it to you more directly.
Yeah, actually, I'm probably on the same page. I'm not sure how long it would take either. The main thing I'd be saying, though, is, it should take as long as it takes, because we'd want to make sure we get it right. If the timing is that it really is only going to happen, well, hopefully not every 50 years, but, we want to make sure that we do it right and not rush things through either. So, no, I'd agree with the comment just made in terms of looking at the system at all times, but if we're going to do a comprehensive review, make sure we do a good review and come out with a tax system that raises money more efficiently and costs less to run.
Fair enough. So neither of you would have an idea of whether or not the government should be booking revenue based upon a review so quickly. And I think that's fair enough. I'll insert my own opinion on that at another point. I did have a question. It was mentioned, I think, by Mr. McDonald, and I agree that, or perhaps it was somebody else, but no, it was yourself, Mr. Ball, about we shouldn't be taxing savings. One thing that came out in the budget that has to do with taxation is the bail-in concept for Canadian banks. And I don't know if C.D. Howe would like to answer this, or maybe CPA, but in the past when we studied the bail-in provisions, we made it very clear in our government that we would not be going after the deposits of regular Canadians. The government hasn't been clear on that so far. What is your opinion in terms of bail-in, where Canadian deposits are actually at risk of supporting a bank if it does fail?
I have to be honest that, sorry.
No, I was just going to suggest that we are on Bill C2, but it does relate. You mentioned budget. Go ahead, Mr. Ball.
Actually, I was just going to say I'm not an expert, frankly, on how banks work, so I'm not sure I really can add much to it. I just point out again my role in my firm is an income tax specialist, so I don't really have views on the question around banks, to be honest.
Mr. Alexander has a comment, I believe.
The C.D. Howe Institute will be having a report out in the next month or two on the bail-in provisions for the banking system. And the central issue is really around the transfer of the liability. Like, where, is it the taxpayers who ultimately are backing the banking system? or should it be equity holders? And so what the report looks at is the implications of the bail-in system, and it looks at some of the implications for common equity holders and what the implications of that is to the financial system. But I think one of the underlying assumptions is that the bail-in system is not designed to ultimately have the depositors being the backing. And so I think that most of the discussions around the bail-in capital regime assumes that the depositors are going to ultimately be protected, and I would encourage that fact, because ultimately it increases the stability of the financial system if people know their deposits are safe.
Yeah, we're not Cyprus. And if I have one last question, one I know you can't answer. Can you tell us a little bit about the concerns the C.D. Howe Institute has expressed about total debt load for all governments across the country? We're looking at a $10 billion deficit, I think, in the Alberta budget coming out. Newfoundland budget's going to be interesting as well. What's your point of view in terms of debt across the country, not just a federal debt?
I think ultimately, from a national point of view, consolidated debt actually is what we should be focusing on. So, although the federal government finances look very good, the debt to GDP ratio is quite low and is projected to remain quite stable. I am concerned about the implications of when you add on the provincial debt to GDP ratios, which really does change the comparisons, right? Because when you look at the Canadian federal government compared to the U.S. government, Canada looks very, very favorable. When you do the U.S. government plus all the U.S. states, and then you do the Canadian federal government plus all the provinces, boy, that Canada is outperforming, but it's not outperforming by the same margin. But having said that, I think ultimately sound budgetary practices is ultimately to anchor your fiscal projections in a projection that ultimately leads you back to balance. And so ultimately, I do not like the debt to GDP ratio as a fiscal anchor. I think it's an extraordinarily weak anchor.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you both. Mr. Colonel, 6 minutes.
Thank you very much. I'll get straight to the point. Mr. MacDonald, I was very interested in the options that you put forward. An alternative to what do we see in C2. You expressed yourself well. You said we're increasing tax for 0.8 or 1% of the population, and we're sharing that amounts to 25% of the population, but we're ignoring most people.
Assertion that basically that the change in tax rates that are being presented in C2 basically affect only about 30% of the population among the highest incomes, and doing nothing basically for 70%.
The changes to the middle income tax bracket come in at incomes above $45,000. So, by definition, any Canadians that are below that amount are not going to benefit from the income tax cuts. The question is, if you do if you think about this from a mixed point of view, there are measures in the budget that do support Canadian families with incomes below the $45,000, but purely on the basis of the tax changes that we are talking about. The tax changes only impact households above individuals with incomes above $45,000.
I understand what you're saying. That's often the point of the government. On the other side, even with the other measures, it doesn't do much for couples without kids, for individuals, seniors, for example, except for single seniors. So all in all, there's many Canadians who are left unaffected by the changes, even though it's called the middle class tax cut. Je connais votre travail sur les inégalités des revenus.
I know the work that you've done. We've heard from you before at the Finance Committee. So amongst Mr. MacDonald's options, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at what he had suggested, but he talks about increasing tax credits for working income tax benefit.
Address income inequalities, especially among workers with a low income or earning like minimum wage, for example.
When I looked at when I've done some work looking at the ability of the income tax system to affect income inequality, what I find is that incremental changes to our tax system are not going to have large scale effects. But one of the, if you want to change income inequality more through the tax system, it would be taking the revenues generated at the high end and focusing it more on low-income Canadians versus middle-income Canadians. That would actually impact income inequality in a greater way, but the effect would still be actually incremental, because the tax system, the tax changes aren't going to be, so if we think about the high-income earners, you're basically looking at about 260,000 people, and then transferring income to, if you do it to everybody else, you're talking about 35 million Canadians, right? And so you're not going to have any real discernible impact. So the more focused you get, the bigger the impact you're going to have. But the one thing I would stress is that if you really want to make a big difference on income inequality, it's not going to be through the tax system. There are an awful lot of barriers that are preventing people from realizing their potential, and it's getting rid of those barriers that will actually raise people up the income scale. And so it's not the tax system that is going to have the biggest impact on changing income inequality.
About
anybody else want in on that? I thought Mr. McDonald did. Go ahead.
Sure. I think it's important to differentiate poverty from income inequality. There are certainly some very positive measures in this budget that address poverty specifically, but that I think is different than income inequality, which does focus more on the middle class. And is the middle class enjoying the same level of growth in incomes as the upper class? It's quite clear that they haven't over the last couple decades. And that being said, I think the examination in the report shows that it's actually very difficult to target only the middle class without more benefits going either to the low end or to the higher end when you're using the tax transfer system. And if we are concerned about income inequality, I actually agree with Mr. Alexander that non-tax changes will likely have the biggest impact. Increasing, for instance, unionization rates, or increasing, for instance, median wages and driving median wage growth in Canada will likely have a bigger impact on income inequality by driving pre-tax incomes. We can offset that to some degree with the tax system, but non-tax issues are probably larger.
En fait, j'allais vous demander.
I was going to ask you for an answer, yes. I also have, I'll come back to you. I'll have a question at the end for the accountants as well.
On TFSAs, and the figure that worries me, and I'm sure that you read it, the figure that worries me is figure 3, where we're looking at the long-term impact it could have, especially with the, I believe behavioral changes were actually inputted in this model. In terms of percentage of the PEB, GDP, we're talking about 0.14 in 2020 with the higher ceiling, going up to almost 0.7% of GDP. Right now, we're being told that we can't achieve that for international aid because it's really too high and nobody's achieving it, and we are ready to actually open with a higher ceiling to 0.7% of GDP in terms of net impact. Do you dispute the numbers of the parliamentary budget officers in that regard, Monsieur McDonald, et ensuite Monsieur Alexander? Rapidement, j'ai une question rapide à la fin si j'ai la chance.
I'll have another question at the end if it's possible.
To this one.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's pretty clear that with growing TFSA limits, whether it's at 5,000 or at 10,000 or back at 5,000, the larger issue is what's the lifetime limit of TFSA holders. And I think that will become an issue later on as you face exactly that problem. That anyone, and this is skewed heavily towards the wealthy end of the spectrum, the folks that can manage to save, have enough income to save, have seen big enough raises to save, are going to be the ones with the most assets that are being tax sheltered through TFSAs or RSPs or any of these other alphabet soup of savings vehicles. And I think over the long run, if we go back to the Carter Commission, which was mentioned earlier, the last major review of the tax system, one of the conclusions is a buck is a buck. Whether you make money selling stocks, you make money sweeping floors, you should pay the same amount. At present, that's not the case given the 50% capital gains exemption. And with TFSAs, it's even more the case because there's no taxation whatsoever. So a buck is not a buck. If you're making a buck through what wealthy people do, buying and selling stock and real estate and so on, you pay no tax. But if you make a buck the way most Canadians do, which is working from 9 to 5, then you pay the regular tax system.
I think it's important.
I'll have to cut you there. Sorry, gents. Miss O'Connell.
Okay.
Very much, Mr. Chair. My first question is to Mr. Alexander, actually, in regards to, at the beginning of your comments, you mentioned about the tax reduction for the middle class and how, you know, the good things, the $3.4 billion, the stimulation, etc. And you talked about it's also good timing because people now have a higher debt load than ever before. And then later on in your comments, you talked about the reduction or taking the TFSA levels back to the 5,500. And you talked about more people could maximize it than what the government or the finance department is saying. So how can you correlate? We have some of that, you know, the average Canadian has some of the highest debt loads than we've seen, but they're able to save more than ever too. Because you somewhat, I think, contradicted the finance department's comments or testimony yesterday where they said it was about 2 million Canadians actually utilizing the full TFSA amount, and of those 2 million, it's the highest earner spectrum, and you contradicted that.
So to be clear, the cut in the middle income tax rate will provide tax relief, and based on the personal savings rate, which is sort of in the low single digits, you know, the bulk of that money is likely to ultimately end up into consumption. A small portion of it will end up in savings. My point is that the savings isn't going to add to economic growth, so it won't show up in the government's estimates of how much of a boost the economy gets from the tax cut, but it actually has a benefit because encouraging Canadians to save more is good. Although we are seeing many Canadians take advantage of TFSAs, I think that there is still concerns about whether Canadians are saving adequately for retirement. And Canadians are carrying larger debt burdens, longer in life, and there are issues related to what's happening to the savings life cycle. In other words, Canadians are saving later in life, and so this creates concerns, particularly amongst Canadians that do not have an employer pension plan. And so when we look at the Canadian population, we say, what is the at-risk population that's going to fall short of income replacement during retirement? What we find is it's middle income households that do not have employer pension plans. And so as a consequence, this is one of the reasons why RSPs and TFSAs are useful savings vehicles, because it provides an additional incentive for Canadians to save. What's interesting about the TFSA, which hasn't actually come up at this point, is that what the criticism that's being leveled is that that the TFSA is predominantly being used by high-income households. This actually isn't true. It's being used across the entire income spectrum. And in fact, the advantage of the TFSA is it actually is designed to actually help people in the lower tax bracket, because often the people with the lower income tax rates are not getting large tax credits when they save through RSPs. So the TFSA will actually give them a better tax return, tax payoff in terms of their savings. And so as a consequence, it's low-income Canadians and low middle-income Canadians that actually benefit the most from a tax point of view through the TFSA. The question really is about what should the limit be? And what should the annual limit be, or what should the lifetime limit be? But ultimately, we want Canadians to save more, and so the fact that the TFSA has proven popular is basically a signal that it is a useful vehicle and a useful complement in terms of helping incent Canadians to save. So I don't actually view any of this to be contradictory.
Thank you. I think, though, where we differ is your definition of popular and who's finding the maximum contribution, the previous, as popular, because if there's no disagreement that TFSAs are important and encouraging more, but if you can't afford to put in that maximum, then it's really those who can afford it that probably need the savings least. So that's the issue with that limit. But I just have a question in regards to what you said again in terms of that the finance department's comments are wrong about the highest earners are the ones taking the full utilization of TFSAs. Have you actually studied this, and if so, what is that report?
So let me. Yeah. So I'm going to be very, very succinct. So If we look at Canadians, the estimate from Canadian Revenue Agency data is that 20% of Canadians that are in TFSAs are hitting their maximum contribution limit. If we look at it by income distribution, people at the high end of the income scale, it's around 32% of high income earners are hitting the maximum. But if you look at Canadians in the $20,000 to $25,000 range, it's about 17% are hitting that limit. So the Department of Finance is right. It is true that high income earners are using TFSAs more, and more of them are hitting the maximum than people lower on the income scale. However, you should not characterize the TFSAs as being solely used as a savings vehicle by high-income earners, because in fact the data shows it's being used by Canadians across the entire income spectrum.
Jen, I'll have to cancel you there. Mr. McDonald wanted to answer before, and then we're out of time.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote a report on this 2 years ago, which I presented to the Finance Committee at the time. About 70% of the top 1%, the very, very high end, have a TFSA. But as Alex pointed out, only about 30% of them maximize it. And this was given the 2013 levels, which have increased obviously since that point. We've actually seen fairly dramatic falls in the percentage of people, even at the very high end, that are maximizing their TFSAs. So for the top 10%, for instance, of the income distribution, the amount that are maximizing their TFSAs has fallen from about a quarter in 2010 to almost 10%, only 10% once you get to 2015. This is projected for 2015. So as these limits continue to go up, even at the very high end, you're just not seeing people maximize those accounts. But the people that are maximizing are disproportionately among the wealthy. Now, the original idea of the TFSA, as proposed by people like Reese Kesselman, was actually to protect low-income earners from clawbacks related to the guaranteed income supplement upon retirement. But those are not the folks that are using the TFSA, despite the fact that being probably the biggest way that you could benefit from a TFSA. Look, if you're making $30,000 a year, you don't have money to save. And so it doesn't matter whether you have an RSP or a TFSA. It doesn't matter what the incentives are. There is no money left over at the end of the day. You haven't seen your incomes increase in 30 years. That's a substantial problem. And while these savings vehicles may be helpful for the higher end, they're not helpful at the low end. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. O'Connell. Thank you. Thank all our witnesses. And sorry we cut you a little on time. Mr. Alexander, Mr. McDonald, Ms. Morris, Ms. Ball. Mr. Ball, thank you for your presentations. We will now go back to the motion we were dealing with, and while the next witnesses come to the table. So, who has an answer on the Minister of CRA? Does anyone? Mr. Champagne, did you get any information from the Minister?
I think a member of the committee will.
Okay, Mr. Sabero.
Give us 30 seconds or.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I understand that the Minister will be available before May the 20th.
Okay, that's the decision of the Minister, Mr. Caron. There's your information on the Minister before May the 20th.
Just one quick question. When was the Minister contacted about the possibility of appearing? She seemed to know that she would be appearing yesterday during question period. We discussed the possibility of her appearing during the motion that was tabled in March. Looking at May is really far. I'm just disappointed that since 48 hours there didn't seem to have been any contact or any attempts to actually have her come to the committee in an expeditious manner.
Mr.
Like
Champagne, did you have something you wanted to add, or who? Mr. Sabera.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it behooves the committee to continue our work on Bill C2. With regards to the motion, it was discussed amongst ourselves that we would like the Minister to appear, and now we've contacted the Minister and we've received feedback that the Honourable Minister will be available before May the 20th.
Is it, could I ask a question, is April 21st ruled out? Is that still a possibility? I mean, before May 20th is any time between now and May 20th. So I would, and I would think if we told the Minister it's the wish of the committee that she come in her own right, I think the feeling of the committee is we should hear CRA officials who were involved in this process on their own, and the minister on her own, and deal with this issue and estimates, right? Okay. Mr. Sabera.
No, I think we all want to know the answers in terms of what's happened and the stories that have come out, and we want to ensure, and I think Mr. Caron, our objectives are the same, to ensure that Canadians have confidence in our tax system, that everyone is paying their fair share, and there are no sweetheart deals or anything like that going on. So I think it behooves us to continue studying the C2, and the minister has responded that she is available to come to the committee prior to May 20th. Thank you.
Okay, I have Mr. Caron first, then Mr. McColman, and we're going to deal with the motion sooner or later.
L'argument comme quoi nous devons étudier.
The point that we have to study C2 straight away is not quite the case. We've already voted on this in the Ways and Means, so there's no urgency. The efforts that we are undertaking to ensure that the minister can come before us in a reasonable period of time is not that we're trying to delay C2, not at all. We want the minister to come on the 21st of April, and then we can continue on Bill C2, and then we can come back to the report that I suggested we would have to do as well. So once again, why is it that, seeing we've known about this for 48 hours, why was the minister not given the heads up earlier? It's not as if the motion was a surprise. The minister was aware of it, because, and we know that because she mentioned it in the House yesterday. Bear in mind, and it's my last point, she said the comment that we want clarification on was made in March, and according to this motion she has up until the 20th of May to respond, so that we need to, in terms of accountability, we need clarification on whether she did, why she said what she did about there having not been an amnesty. We need to know why she made that statement, and it's a long time to have to wait.
Mr. Sabera.
I'd just like you to remind the Chair that I have somewhat introduced my motion in parallel to this motion for the minister to come on main estimates as well. So whatever the minister's contemplating on this amount of time spent on C2, I'm asking through my motion that she comes on main estimates as well. So usually that would be an hour each.
Yeah, my understanding is that the minister would be here on both points, one on KPMG and the Isle of Man issue, and the other on estimates. Okay. Mr. Sabera.
I'd just like to reiterate my point, what I already said. We've put forward a motion and we've answered with when the minister is available to come by May the 20th.
Okay.
And we'd like to proceed.
Are you calling the question on your motion, Mr. Caron?
I have a couple of comments. I would like to underscore that this seems to be down to poor organisation on the government side. I've said this before. You had 48 hours to communicate this, to say that we wanted to have the minister appear before us within a reasonable amount of time. The second point before we vote, and it's another important point that isn't in the motion, and that is that we have to have a second meeting so as we can discuss drafting a report following our meeting with the minister. And that was something that was included in my motion that I had tabled, and it does not feature in the current motion, so I'd like to table an amendment to that effect.
And then I want to make a comment on Guy's point.
Monsieur le Président, je voudrais juste clarifier.
I would just like to qualify something here. It's not a lack of organisation. It's just that the committee wants to move ahead with C2. We want the minister to come as quickly as possible. So it's not a lack of organisation. It's simply a matter of making sure that we finish the important work that we've got to do on C2. And whenever we finish with C2, then we'll look at the schedule with the members of the committee, with the ministers, and that's the first date after that is the 20th. Everybody knows the motion that the member put forward. We want to finish with C2. Whenever we finish with C2, the minister will come along with their officials, and the first date that comes up then is the 20th of May. We're having the minister come along. It's in the interest of transparency. We want to get it done, but we also want to get the Bill C2 done as well.
The question.
Je pose la question. Je viens d'expliquer que
I have just explained that C2, it's not particularly urgent at the moment. I'm certainly not suggesting we put it off, though. It's already been dealt with in Ways and Means. I'm not saying we don't discuss it until the fall, not at all. But we've already voted on these things in the Ways and Means motion. So for the government, what then is the most important? To discuss a bill that is already in operation, or to talk about this matter of tax havens and an amnesty that is perhaps being given to people that have cheated the system. It seems to me that the government's chosen between these two options, and it's chosen that it's more important to talk about this bill that's already in effect than it is to talk about tax havens. And the second question that hasn't been answered yet. We have to have another meeting afterwards to make a report. We have to see the minister. We have to hear from the people from CRA who are going to be talking about the situation. Yes, that's one part of it. But then, as a committee, we have to sit down and discuss what they said and discuss how we're going to report back to Parliament. And that is still missing from the motion.
In 1 second. I mean, I think C2 has to get through here and go to the Senate as well. But what I'm wondering is, and your point on report, we can't hear from witnesses and the minister and not do a report. So, I mean, I think numbers of us who've been around Parliament for a while realize the committee is going to have to sit for however long it takes to do a report. So what I would suggest, we'll deal with this motion, but what I would suggest is that the steering committee meet on Monday, if that's possible, to schedule in what we can on witnesses on this point, or finishing up a C2 as well, other issues that may be on the steering committee's agenda, so that we can schedule it out. And I think the government has heard the push for the minister as soon as possible, and maybe by Monday, the minister could have perhaps a more clear position on what date she may be able to come. Question, Mr. Saber.
No, and
one short one.
We concur with the report. We understand that.
Okay, Mr. You okay?
La dernière question en suspens, une autre question.
Another question, one that was raised by Ms. Raitt, about the letter that ought to be produced, the production of documents for the discussion. Would there be any objection on the government side for us having access to this letter, for this letter to be produced to the committee? It was again a point that was in the original motion.
We'll proceed with the motion I've forwarded to today.
Okay, questions been called on the motion that's before the committee. All those in favor of the motion. Do you need it read, or are we okay? We're okay? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. We're off the, just so we're clear, we're off the understanding that when the minister comes, there'll be an hour on this issue, on the KPMG CRA tax issue, and an hour on estimates, just so we're clear for the steering committee, correct?
Correct, but I just want to be very clear, Chair, that I submitted my motion within the time period to present it as a motion, and if it's not to be voted on here, I want to have your assurance as chair that she will come on the estimates, and because that's what I just think I heard you say.
That's my understanding, and I think everybody's on the same page on that, correct? Okay.
Okay.
Then could we go to, could we suspend to get the video conference up and go to witnesses? Thank you.
Hello, this is Ottawa, Parliament of Canada. Can you guys hear me?
Again, I want to thank the new witnesses for coming to the table on the reference of Bill C-2, an act to amend the Income Tax Act. From the Canadian Labour Congress, we have Angela McEwen. From the Conference Board of Canada, Matthew Stewart. Video conference from Warm, BC. From the Fraser Institute, Charles Lamon. And as an individual, Kevin Milligan, as a professor with the University of BC. So starting, Mr. McEwen, with you. Thank you very much.
Ms. McEwen.
Ms. McEwen.
Thank you very much. I'm here on behalf of the 3.3 million members of the Canadian Labour Congress, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to present our views on the changes to the Income Tax Act that are proposed in Bill C-2. The CLC brings together Canada's national and international unions, along with provincial and territorial federations of labour and 130 district labour councils, whose members work in virtually all sectors of the Canadian economy, in all occupations, and in all parts of Canada. Personally, I think it's important to analyze these changes in terms of whether or not they will increase fairness and reduce inequality. In the case of Bill C-2, I find that the result is mixed. The first part of the bill deals with the proposed middle-class tax cut. This proposal reduces personal income tax rates on income between $45,000 and $90,000 a year, and then increases tax rates on income over $200,000. So as Andrew Jackson, my former boss and the senior policy advisor at the Broadbent Institute points out, this definition of the middle class leaves out most workers. And why is this? Well, most workers don't make enough money to benefit. Data from the Canada Revenue Agency shows us that only 1 in 3 individual tax filers had taxable income over $45,000 in 2013. And because of how our tax system is structured, the maximum benefit of $670 per year, that's only available to people who earn between $90,000 a year and $200,000 a year. So that maximum benefit goes to the wealthy group who arguably don't need it. On top of this, we know that tax cuts are the least effective form of government spending in terms of reducing inequality or stimulating the economy. I think we heard from the last panel that tax cuts in terms of addressing inequality are not a really effective way of doing that. So while we are supportive of the increase to the top personal income tax rates, we think that this revenue would have been better spent, for example, strengthening public services, such as healthcare. Public services benefit everyone and reduce inequality. Pharmacare and home care are good examples of healthcare spending that can increase efficiencies in healthcare delivery and make lives easier for Canadians. On the second part of Bill C2, regarding the tax-free savings account, we think it's great that the government has reversed the previous government's changes. Returning the annual contribution limit to $5,500 recognizes that very few Canadians had the resources to take advantage of the higher limit. In fact, only about 8% of eligible Canadians had reached the maximum contribution limit during the first 4 years of the program. Again, as the other panel noted, it's the lifetime contribution that's going to matter in the long run, but for now, this is a good move. Although on retirement security, the Canadian Labour Congress feels that a much more important action to provide Canadians with real retirement security would be to double the CPP as soon as possible. In terms of what workers get from the Canadian pension plan, it costs less than other ways of saving, such as mutual funds, RRSPs, or even the tax-free savings account. In a country as rich as Canada, no one should retire into poverty. Thank you for your time.
Ms. McEwen, and thank you for holding it tight. Mr. Stewart.
Thank you very much for having me here today. Before I begin, I just want to say that the Conference Board is an independent, not-for-profit, evidence-based organization, and we don't lobby for any organization. I'll speak briefly on the TFSAs first, and then I'll speak very briefly on the economic impacts of the tax changes proposed in this measure. First, on TFSAs, why do we want to have these type of savings plans? Tax-free savings accounts were created in 2009 to improve the incentives to save. And there's sufficient evidence that we believe that Canadians are under-saving. The share of employees with workplace pension plans are declining. Today, just 30% of Ontario tax filers who make more than $20,000 a year contribute to a workplace pension plan. Just 18% of tax filers without a workplace pension plan contribute to an RRSP, which was previously the main vehicle for saving for retirement. Even for those, that means that 50% of people in Canada making more than $20,000 a year do not have a pension plan and don't contribute to an RRSP. Even for those who contribute, their contribution remains well below the average comparative contribution of those contributing to a pension plan. So why would a TFSA be of use when so many Canadians are not taking advantage of the current RRSP rules? It makes sense, basically, three people. For low-income groups, where it doesn't make sense to save in an RRSP, as they'd face clawbacks upon retirement of government programs such as GIS. Also, young workers who could face higher tax rates in retirement as their income progresses into higher marginal rates. It also could aid seniors who are trying to generate income outside of an RRSP. These groups, it can eliminate very high tax rates on savings and encourage savings, which we believe is a good thing for the economy. Now, have TFSAs been successful in boosting savings rates? Well, what we do know is that they're widely used. There's almost 11 million people holding a TFSA, and 18% have maxed out their contributions. Now, one thing that really surprised me when I looked at the data is that 50% of those who had maxed out their contribution had income of less than $55,000 a year. So it's used across all income groups. That is likely to change, though, as the lifetime contribution increases over time. So is the $5,500 suggested today enough? Well, a young worker would probably be able to generate about $600,000 in today's dollars if they contributed the maximum over their lifetime. So there is some question that perhaps that's not enough if they just use the TFSAs, but it is significant if they use it together with our RSPs. On income taxes, what I did is I modeled the economic impact of the income taxes, the hike on the high income taxes, and the reduction on the second bracket. And what I found is that it'll boost GDP by a marginal amount. In fact, we expect it'll increase GDP by just $800 million a year, adding about just 5,000 jobs to the economy. So it is a marginal impact on the economy. Now, there is a few risks, though, that people in the high income bracket, we have heard from our members that it makes it harder to them to attract high income earners into Canada. So we have heard that risk. But overall, a marginal impact on the economy. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stewart. Mr. Lamon from Vancouver, the floor is yours.
Hello, that's me. Thank you, Chairman Easter and the rest of the committee for giving me an opportunity to share the work of the Fraser Institute with you today. I hope you find my comments helpful and informative as you deliberate these important public policy issues. I'm the Director of Fiscal Studies at the Fraser Institute. We're an independent, nonpartisan economic policy think tank. The mission of the Institute is to help average Canadians understand the impact of government policies on their lives and the lives of future generations. I've been studying tax policy for about a decade now and have published several peer-reviewed studies on a range of economic policy issues, including taxation and government finances. Last month, I co-authored a study that's entitled Canada's Rising Personal Tax Rates and Falling Tax Competitiveness, so much of my remarks will draw from the findings of that research. I should note that my comments today reflect my own opinions and observations about the research we have conducted. I do not speak for anyone else at the Fraser Institute. Let me start by saying that a competitive tax system is critical to fostering a positive economic climate. Empirical evidence from across the world shows that taxes can influence whether people engage in economically productive activities such as working hard, expanding their skills, investing, and being entrepreneurial. These are all activities that ultimately drive economic growth and prosperity. Over the past 15 years, federal and provincial governments in Canada of various political stripes have improved the competitiveness of our business tax regime, but little has been done on personal income taxes. Personal income taxes are particularly important when it comes to building a knowledge-based economy and attracting and retaining highly skilled workers such as entrepreneurs, doctors, lawyers, business professionals, and engineers. The new top federal marginal tax rate proposed by Bill C-2, as well as recent tax rate increases in many Canadian provinces, harm our ability to attract skilled workers and, in fact, discourage Canadians from realizing their full potential. Critically, the new top federal marginal tax rate of 33% is being layered on top of several tax increases by the provinces on highly skilled workers. For instance, as a result of federal and provincial tax hikes, the combined top federal provincial statutory marginal rate in Ontario has increased from 46.4% to 53.5% since 2009. That's more than a 7 percentage point increase. According to the latest available international data, Ontario's top combined marginal rate is the 6th highest among 34 OECD countries and 2nd highest among G7 countries, behind only France. More broadly, due to recent tax hikes, the combined top rate is now above 50% in 6 out of 10 provinces. Consider that for a moment. In many Canadian provinces, including Canada's 2 largest, highly skilled workers can lose more than half of each additional income earned in labor income to personal income taxes. Again, the economic evidence shows that high and increasing marginal tax rates discourage productive economic activity, making Canada a less desirable place to work, invest, and be entrepreneurial. They can also influence decisions about where highly skilled workers decide to live and work. There are, of course, many reasons why someone might decide to move to another jurisdiction, but empirical research shows that marginal tax rates play an important role in that decision, particularly for high-skilled labor. The fact that Canada's tax rates often apply to lower levels of income than other countries further erodes our tax competitiveness. At an annual income level of 150,000 or 300,000 Canadian, every province's combined statutory marginal rate is higher than the combined rate in every U.S. state. This presents a clear challenge for Canada's ability to attract and retain skilled workers relative to our southern neighbors. And it's not just Canada's top personal tax rate that is uncompetitive. In most provinces, a Canadian making $50,000, again in Canadian dollars, faces a higher statutory rate than they would in most U.S. states. So this is despite the reduction in Canada's federal rate from 22% to 20.5%. In other words, Bill C-2 does little to address Canada's uncompetitive tax rates, even for the middle tax brackets. But the importance of a competitive tax system is not just fostering a skilled workforce. By discouraging productive economic activity, high and increasing tax rates ultimately diminish economic growth and prosperity. Indeed, because high and increasing tax rates adversely affect economic incentives, governments often do not receive the kind of revenues they expect from these tax increases. In closing, it is worth noting that past federal governments, both Liberal and Conservative, have acknowledged the importance of a competitive personal income tax system. For example, the economic plan of Paul Martin's Liberal government in 2005 called for lower personal taxes to, quote, provide greater rewards and incentives for middle and high-income Canadians to work, save, and invest, to encourage more Canadians to invest in their skills and to remain in Canada, where their talents will help build a stronger, more prosperous economy. In 2006, Stephen Harper's Conservative government made a similar point in its economic plan. Unfortunately, since then, marginal tax rates on highly skilled workers have generally become less, not more competitive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Milligan. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'll be brief. I have a couple of comments on Bill C-2 and a couple of points to make about the new 33% top tax bracket and its impact on government revenues and tax planning and tax avoidance. The first comment is just to emphasize the importance of considering the differences between federal taxation and provincial taxation. In a federation like Canada, it is more difficult to tax mobile economic factors at the provincial level. For example, if a province tries to tax high earners, some of that income may shift to other provinces through the use of financial and accounting techniques. As an example, there's something called an Alberta Family Trust, into which a high earner could put some assets, and that essentially shifts the taxation of the income from those assets to Alberta, where they face lower rates. Now, on the other hand, at the federal level, it is harder to avoid taxation because if you're going to try to engage these kinds of techniques, it is harder to shift money out of Canada than it is between provinces. In research with Michael Smart from the University of Toronto, we found that high-income taxpayers are much more likely to shift their income and engage in these tax planning techniques, much less likely in response to a federal change than they are to a provincial change. So when looking at these revenue implications of a high-income tax bracket, we should definitely pay attention to evidence on federal changes versus provincial changes. My second point is about the administrative measures that have been put in place over the past few months. Now, these enhanced administrative measures are critical to combating tax planning and tax avoidance. If the Canada Revenue Agency makes it harder for individuals to engage in tax planning, then the new 33% tax bracket is more likely to reach its revenue targets. So the government has already announced several measures that move in that direction. As an example, in the recent budget, there's a change in the definition of active versus passive income for small business corporations. And there's also an announcement of several $100 million new dollars for enforcement programs at the Canada Revenue Agency. But I believe there's still more to do on three fronts. First, we should reduce the use and the availability of small business corporations as tax shelters. We can do that through examining spousal dividends, by looking at the lifetime capital gains exemption for small business corporations, and consider using an employee count or an hours threshold, as Quebec has done for access to the small business deduction. Second thing we can do is to reopen the case for the taxation of stock options. That was taken off the table by the finance minister recently, but I do think there are some merits there that deserve some more attention. And finally, on the issue of, again, tax planning and tax avoidance, it's really important to consider the international angle. And much of that happens through organizations like the OECD. They pursue multilateral agreements to curb tax planning and tax avoidance at both the corporate and personal level. And at those international organizations, Canada can and should be taking a leadership role in pushing those processes forward. That's it for my comments. I look forward to members' questions.
Thank you very much, Al. And members will have to tighten up the questions fairly well. We have about 3.5 minutes for the round of 4 questions. Mr. Ouellette, I believe, was first. Mr. Graywell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for coming today and testifying. Quick question to Mr. Lemon from the Fraser Institute. And to Mr. Stewart, both of you mentioned that raising personal tax rates on the richest people in the country leads to a lack of talent coming into Canada. And I've heard this through, various witnesses that came through pre-budget consultations, and I asked this question a few days ago as well. And it says empirical evidence. Can either of you guys point to a report that says X number of people decided not to take a job in Canada because of the tax rate in Canada? Mr. Stewart?
Thank you very much for the question. Now, we haven't done a study on this, in fact, but my comments around that, we meet with our members on a regular basis, which are large companies, and that comment comes from complaints or suggestions from our members to look into that issue, and comes from their reported difficulty in attracting high-skilled workers to Canada because of tax competitiveness. So it comes purely from our members' complaints.
It's almost a double-edged sword because a lot of Fortune 500 companies headquarter in Canada because of our corporate tax policies, right? So I would be really interested to know, because people say in all the reports that there's empirical evidence, but it doesn't mean anything unless there's a numbers-based identification to say that Canada is losing out on top talent because of our personal tax rates. And again, only the top 1% of Canadians make north of $200,000 anyway. So I think, and Mr. Lemon, is it? Lemon. Sorry, my apologies. Do you have any comments on that?
I do. Thank you very much for your comments. I think it's an important point. So we have, in fact, reviewed the literature on this, and we've looked at studies that have been done historically in Canada and studies that have been done around the world. And clearly, the evidence does show that taxes can affect where people locate and also work. So there has been research that has been done by Statistics Canada, for example, looking at the mobility of knowledge-based workers, including doctors, engineers, and natural scientists. I'm happy to pass along references to that study. There's been research that has been published by the Canadian Public Policy Journal looking at the effect of taxation on emigration to the U.S. from 1995 to 2001, where it found that Canadians were in fact immigrating to the U.S., those that had the most to gain in terms of a lower tax bill. It is the most high-skilled that are more prone to moving across jurisdictions. They are more mobile than the average worker because of the opportunities afforded to them. Also, research that has been done, a very important research published by the Institute for Research on Public Policy. There's been major studies that have looked at this issue, studies published in the prestigious American Economic Review, which I would turn your attention to, was published 2 years ago. This study, very innovative in what it did, looked at the influence of taxes on mobility decisions of skilled workers. The study looked at the effective personal tax rates, and it found that they play a significant role in attracting foreign soccer players into top leagues in 14 Western European countries. The effect was particularly strong for high-quality players, defined as players who had been selected for national teams at least once in their career. And finally, in a recent study, this one done by the National Bureau of Economic Research, used a similar method of tracking migration among a specific set of skilled workers. Specifically, the authors looked at superstar, quote, superstar inventors measured by patent citation data in 8 countries, including Canada and the U.S. from 19...
I'm going to have to cut you there. We're going to run out of time.
If you could forward that documentation off to the clerk, that would be appreciated.
Okay.
And I'm almost certain that
too.
professional athletes will pick the lowest tax threshold, but I think that's outside the purview of the government.
Could we go to Ms. Raitt?
Sure. Well, I just did a quick Google search, and I found an Industry Canada report talking about attracting global talent and the effect of taxation. So ask your Minister Baines, and he can point you in the right direction for that information. On TFSAs, and maybe it's just a general statement more than a question, because I don't want to be confrontational, but no, to the witnesses, to you guys all the time, but not to the witnesses. And so, Angela, you said that it's instead of the TFSA ceiling being raised, that it should double the CPP. So my argument to that, of course, would be you don't use CPP if you're saving for your wedding. You don't use CPP if you're saving up to travel. You don't use CPP if you're putting money aside for your kid's education, or if you think you're going to need palliative care or other care in the future. So that's where I think that's where I think the break is in terms of CPP. The concept that TFSAs are only and solely for retirement, I think, is one that is not well founded. I think it's one where people utilize these vehicles for whatever purposes they want to. And the difficulty with CPP, and you know this and I know this, and it's unfortunate people don't want to talk about this, but if you double CPP and you don't allow for other vehicles, people's after-tax dollars or people's pay will be going into a vehicle that if they don't live long enough, they never collect. But in the case of a TFSA, there is an inheritance ability for the kids or for the spouse. So, I mean, that's an important aspect of TFSAs that we should also discuss when we talk about contribution and where people choose to put their money. The other point that I would make, Mr. Chair, and I'll be succinct on it, is if you take a look around the world, when we increased our level to 10,000, we did it not in a vacuum. In the United Kingdom, they have an ISA, which is an investment savings account, an income savings account. And do you know what their limit is, Mr. Chair? I'll tell you what their limit is per year. In Canadian dollars, it's $28,000 a year. That's the limit for the TFSA in the UK, and they've had it in place for many years, and in fact, they have a junior one. So clearly, in their country, they view it as a reasonable and a meaningful way for people to save their money, and it's a good program. We thought a lot of it. We increased the amount as they increased the amount, and I think it was a great legacy of Jim Flaherty. So instead of having kids being told that put something on your credit card now and pay off it later, I think it's very worthwhile to say put some money in your TFSA and delay what you want to do. So, and by the way, we'll actually give you more money, and it's better for you to do it than paying the interest. So that would be my comments on TFSA.
I would like to give Ms. McEwen a few seconds to respond. Go ahead.
Thank you. And Ms. Raitt, you're absolutely correct. The mix matters. It's important for workers to have that CPP that will be there no matter what, right? You'll have it until you die. So the problem with a TFSA is that you can run out of money. But a CPP, you can't run out of money. So if you have that mix of savings vehicles, then you have that security for workers. And you're right, you're encouraging savings. I mean, my husband and I saved up for a house in a TFSA. So it does make sense to have a mix. And to look at workers, and also to look at what services we're providing to people in low income. So that your point is absolutely well taken.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Mr. Sabera. Sorry, Mr. Kenyon, I missed you.
Merci beaucoup. Enfin, j'ai 3 minutes.
I have 3.5 minutes. I'll just ask one question of all 4 of you.
I believe that you're all in agreement with when we're talking about the tax system. That would be for a review of the tax expenditures that we have. I've seen some work done by the QP economist. I've seen some work done by Mr. Hodgson. I do believe there's some work by the Fraser Institute on the topic. And Mr. Milligan, I know you're interested in the topic. Not only is it a matter of reviewing the tax expenditures, I think it's really a matter of considering that some tax expenditures are actually very inefficient, even very detrimental for the economy. We know that the Minister of Finance has announced that he was interested in reviewing tax expenditures. I'd like to have your comments on the state of tax expenditures, the impact it has on economic growth, but also if you consider that tax expenditures and even the review of the tax mix constitute by itself a full reform of the tax system, or it's only one small component or one component that should be even enlarged to actually look at the whole complexity, the administrative costs, I would say even the inefficiency of the current Canadian tax system as a whole. J'aimerais commencer par Mme McEwen, peut-être Mr. Stewart.
Ms. McEwen, if you could start, and then Mr. Stewart, and then over to the other two.
Certainly it is time to have a review of the tax system and the fairness and how business taxes interact with the personal tax system. So it would be broader than just tax expenditures. And one of the big problems with tax expenditures, as I think you all know, is that they aren't evaluated in the same way that other program spending is. And so if we could look at changing how we evaluate tax expenditures as well as what tax expenditures that we have on books. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for the question. Our belief is that we should lower or eliminate much of the tax expenditures and put that money for many of the programs into a lower, broader tax reduction. When you look at the data, people are increasingly paying to get their taxes done. It's increasing the complexity. So eliminating much of these tax expenditures that may not be suiting their original purpose and putting that money towards a lower, broader base and simplifying the tax system makes sense.
Mr. Lamon?
Yes, thank you for that. This is a very important question, and one that I agree with wholeheartedly, that there is a very important need and opportunity to review tax expenditures. By my last count, there are roughly 128 of them in the federal tax system, which now costs more in terms of lost revenue than the entirety of what the federal government collects in personal income tax revenue each year. Now, all tax expenditures are not bad. Some of them, like the personal exemption, are worthwhile, same with RRSPs. But we've done a study, in fact, where we've calculated that the federal government could do away with several of these tax expenditures, many of which are ineffective in terms of encouraging the desired behavior, being regressive, that is, they're disproportionately benefiting higher income earners. So by scaling back or eliminating many of these tax expenditures, we could, in fact, take out the two middle tax brackets in the old system, which would cost about $2 billion, leaving two rates, one of 15% for the overwhelming majority of Canadians, and another at 29% for roughly 2% of taxpayers. So I think this is a really important opportunity to revisit tax expenditures that have grown quite dramatically, particularly since 2006, and to look towards a more simple, pro-growth, and efficient tax system.
Merci. Je voudrais, Monsieur Milligan, que Monsieur Milligan puisse...
Can Mr. Milligan finish?
Mr. Easter. Yes, thank you for the question. I agree with my co-panelists on the importance of looking at the effectiveness of different tax expenditures. But I think it's important also to pick up on a point made by Mr. Caron, which is the complexity of the system. Tax expenditures add substantial complexity, which has an efficiency cost, but it also importantly has a fairness cost. People who have access to greater tax planning and have an accountant on call are able to navigate the complexities of the tax system more easily than a regular middle-class family. And so I think it's important, both from the point of view of efficiency and for fairness of the tax system, to have a thorough examination of tax expenditures.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sabero. We have time for one question.
Okay, how many, 3 minutes or 4 minutes?
You only got about two.
Okay. First comment on the margin, the tax rates. You know, there's marginal tax rate, then your average tax rate, so there's a little bit of a difference there. And I also want to, we need to point out that there are other considerations where in terms of people want to live and work, housing costs, proximity to jobs, transit, amenities, open space. I believe, Kevin, you and I crossed paths at the University of Toronto many years ago when we did our graduate studies, probably like 20 years ago, I think. And you're out at UBC now, so congratulations on you living in Lotus Land there on the West Coast. I will say, I'm going to throw this out there very quickly. Our government's policy to reduce the second tax rate. Some have argued, why didn't you reduce the first tax rate? And I think that it really needs to be known that reducing that second tax rate is very important because a lot of income earners who are in that first tax bracket, qualify for a number of credits that the second bracket of individuals do not. So the maximization of providing benefits to the middle class for the cut to the second tax rate, I think is very very important, and I think it was great policy on the part of our government. Before I answer, I do want to make sure we correct something that Ms. Rayette pointed out earlier on. The bail-in legislation for Canadian banks was brought out by the predecessor government in response to the global bail-in regimes being brought forth by all the regulatory agencies and governments around the world after the financial crisis. It is being put in place to protect depositors, insured depositors. It is to do with bonds that are outstanding and the convertibility of liability. So I do want to correct that. But now we can answer the tax question. Whichever one would like to answer.
Who wants to answer? Who wants to start?
I don't know what the question was.
I'll have a quick response to that. So 2 quick points. This is Mr. Milligan. The first is on the question of mobility of high earners. There is certainly some evidence that there is some sensitivity of high earners to tax rates, but I think we don't want to overestimate that, especially when we're looking at moving between Canada and the U.S. People are going to be less likely to move there than they are among countries in Europe, for example, for many different reasons, especially when you're looking at the soccer player study. But it is important to consider, but I think it's also important to remember that it's not just tax rates that matter, that there are other factors, quality of life, other aspects of society that people make a choice when they choose where to live.
Much, Mr. We are at a time. I'm sorry. I'll thank all the witnesses for their presentations in BC and in here before the table. Thank you very much. Meeting adjourned.